May your day be deeply blessed, and may this entire week ahead bring you peace, purpose, and profound insight. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for today's deep dive.
Yes, thank you for being here. We've got a a remarkably rich mission ahead of us today.
We really do. We are unpacking Genesis chapter 49. And we're going to be using some fantastic detailed scholarship found in the Holman and NAA Study Bibles.
Right, which are just excellent resources for this kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. And for those of you who follow along with, the ancient Near East, the biblical patriarchs, and just the intricate weave of ancient poetry this text is, well, it offers a profound look at how destiny and character intersect.
It really does, because the scene here is just striking. You've got the patriarch, Jacob Israel himself, and he's on his deathbed in Egypt.
Yeah, his physical strength is entirely spent.
But his mind, his prophetic discernment is crystal clear.
Completely sharp. So he gathers his 12 sons around him to deliver these, pronouncements really, on what will happen to them in the days to come.
It's a moment of intense gravity.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this because, and I think you'll agree, this isn't your typical sweet, sentimental goodbye from a dying father.
Not at all.
Oh.
I mean, these final words, they operate as this complex intersection of prophecy, poetry, and just a stark, raw assessment of character.
Yeah, they are harsh sometimes, filled with these wild animal metaphors.
Exactly. And in the ancient world, a patriarch's final blessing wasn't merely a wish for good fortune, It was a binding legal and spiritual declaration.
It actually shaped the trajectory of a family line for generations.
Precisely. And what stands out immediately in Genesis 49 is that Jacob just completely dispenses with any unconditional paternal sentimentality.
He's not sugarcoating anything.
Right. He evaluates the history of his sons, looking intently at their past actions, and forecasts the inevitable societal and historical outcomes of those behaviors.
Which is why this matters so much for you listening right now. It is a masterclass in the ancient understanding of accountability and legacy.
It proves that the character you forge today writes the unalterable script of your descendants tomorrow. Your actions create a ripple effect.
And that concept of inevitable consequence, it's immediately apparent right out of the gate when we look at Jacob's firstborn, Reuben.
Oh, absolutely. Reuben is a prime example.
Because historically and legally, the firstborn was entitled to the preeminent status, right? The primary leadership role, a double portion of the inheritance.
All package.
Yeah, but Jacob strips all of that away. He literally compares his oldest son to turbulent water and declares that he will no longer excel.
It's essentially an anti-blessing.
Right, a formal revocation of the birthright. Why did he do that?
Well, the revocation is absolute, and according to the study notes, the underlying cause is deeply rooted in the geopolitical and familial dynamics of the time.
It's dark stuff.
It is. Jacob specifically cites Reuben's past transgression. Reuben profoundly disrespected his father by sleeping with Bilhah, who was Jacob's concubine.
Which, to modern ears, sounds like a grave moral and relational betrayal, which it was, obviously.
Right, but in the context of ancient patriarchal societies, it was more than just a moral failure. Taking a father's concubine was a recognized political maneuver.
Like a power grab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was an attempt to usurp the father's authority and claim headship of the family prematurely. Reuben was essentially attempting a coup.
Wow. So Jacob's response here on his deathbed confirms that Reuben's turbulent, uncontrolled ambition permanently disqualified his entire lineage from leadership.
That's it. And historically, the tribe of Reuben would settle east of the Jordan River and eventually just fade into obscurity.
They never produced a major judge or prophet or king.
Not a single one.
And the stripping of status doesn't stop there. It continues with the second and third sons, Simeon and Levi.
Right. Brothers 2 and 3 don't fare much better.
Jacob links them together, defining their legacy by their shared capacity for brutality. I mean, he calls their swords instruments of violence.
He actually curses their anger. Not them as individuals directly, but he curses their fury, describing it as cruel and fierce.
And the consequence he dictates is that they will be divided in Jacob and scattered in Israel, which is a direct payback for their collective vigilantism years prior at Shechem.
Yes, the Shechem massacre, where they manipulated a religious rite to slaughter an entire city in retaliation for the assault on their sister Dinah.
It was incredibly brutal.
And it was a diplomatic and moral disaster for Jacob's burgeoning clan. It made them odious to the surrounding Canaanites.
So Jacob understood that this vulva combination of Simeon and Levi was a massive danger to the stability of the family.
Exactly. By prophesying their scattering, He ensures they will never possess the concentrated geographic and military power to execute that kind of rogue violence ever again.
Which brings us to the so what insight here. The historical fulfillment of this scattering is just fascinating.
It really is. Simeon's inheritance was eventually swallowed up entirely within the borders of Judah's territory. They essentially dissolved.
They just faded into Judah. But Levi's scattering is equally profound, just taking a remarkably different trajectory.
Right, because the Levites didn't receive a continuous block of territory at all.
No, they were dispersed across 48 specific cities throughout the other tribal lands. But that punitive scattering was later transformed, wasn't it?
It was, because centuries later, during the incident of the golden calf, the tribe of Levi stood with Moses. So their dispersion was repurposed.
They became the decentralized priestly class of Israel.
Which is incredible poetry, really.
Mm-hmm.
The very men whose ancestors used swords for unchecked violence were eventually given the sacred knives to manage the sacrificial system for the entire nation.
That is a striking example of a consequence remaining in place. I mean, they still never got their own traditional land, but the nature of that consequence being redeemed for a higher purpose.
It beautifully highlights the dynamic nature of these prophecies, rooted in past actions but interacting with future choices.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because after dismantling the leadership claims of his first 3 sons, Jacob turns to his 4th son, Judah.
And the narrative tone just shifts dramatically.
Yeah. It's one of the longest prophecies in the chapter. The pronouncement over Judah is expansive. It elevates him to the position of ultimate authority that Reuben forfeited.
Jacob employs this amazing imagery of an apex predator. He describes Judah as a lion cub that matures into a full, crouching lion and asks rhetorically, who would dare arouse him?
And then the imagery transitions from the raw power of a lion to the formalized authority of a monarch. Jacob states, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes."
Which is huge. The scepter and the staff are universal ancient symbols for sovereign rule.
Right. So the text is explicitly predicting the establishment of a permanent royal dynasty emerging from Judah. But let's look at that crucial phrase, until Shiloh comes.
Yes, that is arguably the most analyzed theological segment of the entire chapter.
What did the study notes say about that?
Well, the Hebrew phrasing is highly complex, but the overwhelming consensus of historical and linguistic scholarship from our sources identifies this as a definitive messianic reference.
Shiloh meaning what exactly?
It carries the connotation of the one to whom it belongs, or the one who brings peace.
Okay.
So while this prophecy finds partial historical fulfillment in the rise of King David in the Davidic dynasty, the scope of the language demands a much larger figure.
Predicting that Judah will be the incubator for royal authority, ultimately culminating in Jesus Christ.
Exactly. The ultimate rightful sovereign to whom the obedience of all nations will be rendered. It elevates Judah's blessing to a sweeping eschatological promise.
Now, beyond that unyielding political and spiritual power, Judah's blessing concludes with this vivid, almost absurd poetic hyperbole regarding immense agricultural wealth.
Extravagant wealth.
Jacob describes a reality where a man ties his donkey to a choice vine and washes his garments in wine.
Which is crazy in an agrarian society. A choice vine was an incredibly valuable, delicate asset.
You would never tie a heavy, burdensome animal like a donkey to it.
Never. Not unless vineyards were so insanely ubiquitous and overgrown that their individual value is negligible.
And washing clothes in wine.
It symbolizes a land so insanely fertile and prosperous that wine is treated like dirty bathwater. It's a portrait of absolute economic security.
Okay, so that's Judah. Now we have to transition to the other major recipient of Jacob's favor, the ultimate contrast here, Joseph.
Yes, this is the other longest blessing in the chapter.
And if Judah is defined by royal authority, Joseph is really defined by enduring fruitfulness under intense hostility.
Endurance under fire.
Jacob uses the metaphor of Joseph as a fruitful vine located near a reliable spring, whose branches possess the vitality to climb over a restricting wall.
And then he shifts right into martial imagery. He describes archers who bitterly attack Joseph, shooting at him, harboring deep hostility.
A clear nod to his brother's past hostility, the false accusations in Egypt, the unjust imprisonment.
But despite all those archers, Joseph's bow remains firm, and his arms are steady.
And the sources pull out some specific, powerful titles for God in this section to explain exactly why Joseph survived.
Yes, Jacob attributes this resilience entirely to divine protection. He invokes titles like the Mighty One of Jacob, the Shepherd, and the Rock of Israel.
Which was a profound theological development in the patriarchal narrative.
It really was. The Mighty One supplied the strength, the shepherd provided meticulous guidance through Egypt's political labyrinth, and the rock offered an immovable foundation when everything else was chaotic.
Joseph's study bow was just a direct reflection of that divine power flowing through him. And the scale of Joseph's blessings here is just massive.
Oh, encompassing everything.
From the highest heavens above down to the deep abyss below, he includes blessings of the breast and the womb, which represents immense descendants.
And the text explicitly states Joseph was distinguished or separated among his brothers,
Reflecting his unique leadership role as the savior of the family during the famine.
and codifying his receipt of the double portion of the inheritance, realized through his two sons who both became distinct tribes.
Okay, so we've got the dominant powers established, but the rest of the chapter is this rapid-fire, almost cinematic run through a menagerie of metaphors for the remaining brothers.
It's fascinating how perfectly these foreshadow the future of their tribes.
Let's run through them. It starts with Issachar, who gets a pretty tragic trade-off.
He's described as a strong donkey resting between saddlebags.
Right, in the text notes, he saw a resting place that was good, a land that was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to the burden.
He traded his freedom for comfort. Issachar's territory would be in the incredibly fertile Jezreel Valley. They had the strength of a beast of burden, but they allowed themselves to be subjected to forced labor by stronger Canaanite forces just to keep their comfortable land.
A devastating critique of complacency. Now contrast that comfort with the guerrilla tactics of Dan and Gad.
Completely different energy. Dan is compared to a horned viper by the roadside, biting a horse's heel so the rider falls backward.
Which perfectly foreshadows their reliance on asymmetric warfare. They were a small tribe squeezed by the Philistine Empire.
Exactly. Think of the judge Samson. He was a Danite who used deception and ambush to destabilize the Philistines.
And Gad is similar, attacked by raiders, but attacking their heels in return.
And Gad's name involves an intricate Hebrew wordplay on the word for raiders. They were on the vulnerable eastern frontier, constantly raided but fiercely resilient.
That martial intensity really peaks with Benjamin, though.
Oh, the ravenous wolf.
Yeah, devouring prey in the morning, dividing the spoil in the evening.
Which predicts the fierce military leadership of figures like King Saul and his son Jonathan, who were Benjamites.
Then finally, wrapping up the brothers, we have the wealthy and the artistic Asher and Naphtali.
Asher is promised royal delicacies from fertile land, perfectly mapping to their productive coastal olive groves.
And Naphtali is depicted as a doe set free, speaking beautiful words, reflecting the free-ranging, mountainous Galilee region.
So Jacob weaves this incredible, complex tapestry of the future.
But then the dramatic conclusion. Jacob finishes his prophecies and gives this strict, highly detailed deathbed directive.
The narrative snaps right back to the visceral reality of the room. He commands his sons to bury him in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite.
The cave of Machpelah, and he meticulously lists who is already buried there: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah.
This isn't just a burial request. By commanding them to take his body out of Egypt and back to that specific plot of land, he is making a profound statement of family unity.
He is claiming the promised land of Canaan, even while dying in Egypt, reminding his sons that Egypt is not their final destination.
It's a supreme act of faith. And following that directive, Jacob draws his feet up into the bed, breathes his last, and is, quote, gathered to his people.
Which the study notes clarify is so much more than just throwing his bones in a family tomb.
Exactly. His physical body would remain in Egypt for weeks for embalming.
Right. So gathered to his people implies a spiritual congregation, an immediate reunion with his ancestors spiritually before his physical body is ever moved.
It reveals a robust conviction in an active afterlife.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? Well, just like the 12 brothers, the choices we make today, the archers we endure, and the comfort we might foolishly settle for, they all write the script of our future legacy.
And it leaves us with a provocative final thought to ponder based on this source text.
What's that?
Well, the notes emphasize that Jacob was spiritually gathered to his people the exact moment he died, completely separate from the later physical burial of his remains.
Right.
How does realizing that these ancient people held such a distinct separation between the location of the physical body and the immediate eternal destination of the soul change how you view ancient history?
That is a staggering question to sit with, and a great place to wrap up today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Genesis 49. We hope you approach your week with clarity and purpose. Take care of yourselves, and remember, God blesses all of you. Goodbye.